Welcome back to Ghostly Talk. This is Scott L.
This is Amber.
And what a night we had.
This was fun. We had Keith Clark back from iDigital Medium, and he gave us an exclusive story.
It's like maybe our first exclusive story
Might
ever.
be.
After we had Keith on, Keith's from iDigital Medium, like Amber said. After we had Keith on, him and I just talked on email. Just kind of conversed back and forth on there, and he mentioned this thing that he wanted to talk about, this thing that he was working on, and I said I'd love to talk about it. It'd be great. And that thing is called Project St. Peter. And this is going to be something, to be very clear, we're going to be having Keith come on, I would say, on a regular basis
It's
now.
just going to be installments.
It's gonna be installments,
Keith wants to present this information. I admit I was a little confused at first because dumb me was like, oh, we're talking about George Meek. I got to look up SpiritCon. And sorry. Well, hey, that was the article I read. SpiritCon,
Yeah.
SpiritCom. So anyway, I was reading about that. And then I guess I didn't realize that Project St. Peter was completely exclusive and not really found on the internet. And this was something George Meeks, through his group, the Metascience Foundation, this was something else he did beyond SpiritCom.
Yeah.
And involved, and this didn't even, we say this in the show, but I thought this was another device that was made. It's just instructions about how to make these devices, supposedly coming out through these.
Let's just lay it out here. I have the official thing right here.
All right.
Here's the description of Project St. Peter. In 1986, the Metascience Foundation was building a celestial broadcast system, an advanced system of communications. A telepathic transmedium channeled instructions from the science team in heaven to the research team on Earth. The plan was to receive information to assist mankind in our evolution using two pieces of equipment, Angel 1 and Michael 1. The research project was codenamed Project St. Peter. This is their story. We're calling it Lab 1, Part 1. We don't know exactly how it's all going to be laid out.
And the initial stuff we've gone through is going to be available on
iDigitalMedium.com.
And we'll have links.
We're going to have a direct link to this first part that you can kind of use, because we kind of went through the broad strokes of it.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to go and look at the detail, like literally the PDFs.
You could read this first, then listen to the show and see how we kind of broke things down, or listen to the show first and then go read it. However you want to do it.
However you want to do it. We're going to make it real easy on you. This is our first installment with Keith Clark on Project St. Peter.
Coming out of a bunker in Michigan, ghostly talk, he's in your ears again. Buckle up, give your head a spin again. Turn it on and come right in. Born in 2002, the one and only GT crew, coming back old school, run right over you. Ghostly talk, ghostly talk, ghostly talk, ghostly talk.
Keith Clark, you were with us a while back, and we had a riot. Well, we were talking about this a second ago. So, and again, I have the memory of a goldfish now. It's gone nowadays. I think when we talked last time, Amber, you snuck in towards the end or something, like you were working or something like that. Or
I remember listening for a long time, and I remember Keith having a really relaxing voice. And we said something about that after. I'm like, that was so relaxing listening to Keith.
It was. It was.
Definitely not how it feels.
So after the show, thanks again, first off, for taking the time to come talk to us again tonight, Keith. With that said, after our discussion we had last time, we were talking about this thing that you wanted to talk about on a podcast or some type of format like this, right? And I jumped it. I'm like, I'd love to talk to you about this stuff. And what we're talking about tonight is a thing called Project St. Peter, which I'm kind of embarrassed. I never really heard anything about.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
There's a good reason for that. It's not on the internet.
Well, yeah, okay, and there isn't a lot out there because I did my fair share of Googling around, and I'm like, there really isn't a lot of stuff out there, which is surprising in today's day and age.
It is.
So, how about I'm going to give the mic to you for a second here, as far as like kind of let's introduce what. I mean, I'd like to hear it from you because you're much better spoken than I am, as we've already established. So, tell me all about Project St. Peter. As far as an intro is concerned.
Sure. Well, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity. I am very glad that both of you accepted my offer to try to get this out to people. So my name is Keith Clark. I would describe myself as an experimenter in ITC, which is instrumental transcommunication, otherwise known as the field of communicating with people in spirit, or shall we say non-physical personalities, non-physical beings, whatever term you'd like to use, communicating with them using electronics. That kind of encompasses the whole field. I'm also a member of the iDigital Medium team, which is sort of activists for the sharing of information related to life after death, as well as preserving of that information. I'm here today to talk about, or to at least begin conversations about a very strange, unique, and amazing story that is all 100% true. For those of you who have not heard or are not familiar, I need to give a little bit of pretext. In the 1980s, it's actually late 70s, early 80s, there was something called Spiritcom, which most people have heard of if you've experimented with instrumental transcommunication.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the most well-known effort by the Metascience Foundation, which was started and administered by George Meek, who's a very well-known, reputable gentleman, was very passionate about life after death and just knowledge in general. During the Spiritcom event, shall I say, let me just try to describe this as quickly as I can. There was a gentleman who was believed to have mediumistic abilities that when he sat with his device, which used 13 tones, the communicating person in spirit was able to produce their voice on those tones. It's definitely one of the most well-known historical accomplishments, and probably one of the most debated now also, in reference to life after death. Okay, that being said, what most people don't know is after Spiritcom, the Metascience Foundation continued their work, and it was much, much, much bigger than Spiritcom. Spiritcom looks like a little baby next to the projects that they continued to carry on. In Spiritcom, they had a device they called the MARC device. I believe Spiritcom, they kept making new versions of it, new reiterations. They would revise these electronic devices that they were using, and they'd call them Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, Mark 4. Well, what most people don't know is they went up to Mark 11 and beyond. I'm not even sure how far they went. And so I need to give a little bit of intro. Metascience Foundation did a lot more than people realize. And so that's sort of the part of the picture that we would like to describe here. Not only that, their information still has not been preserved. It's still, some of it's still on tape, some of it's still in a storage facility, and the breadth and scope of the work that they did has yet to be understood. There was one particular project that they were working on. It was called Project St. Peter. To give a synopsis, there was a team of people in heaven. I'll just refer to it loosely as heaven because it's going to be the easiest terminology to use here.
Okay.
Heaven or paradise would collaborate with a team of people here, being the employees and volunteers of the Metascience Foundation. They would build two devices called the Angel Revision Number 1 and the MARC and the just lost it.
I'm looking through my notes.
Michael.
Yeah,
Angel
Michael.
and Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
As we begin to tell the story a little bit more, we'll get farther into the technical descriptions and details. But the essence of it was, the purpose of this 2-year project was to send information from heaven directly to Earth through these two pieces of equipment, which would then be transcribed and sent out to different organizations to help the evolution of mankind. It was referred to as the Celestial Broadcast System. There are many other names and descriptions for it. It was called an Advanced System of Communications. The way this worked was Metascience Foundation had a telepathic medium. It was a telepathic channel. She also referred to herself as a part trance medium. She would go into trance, and she would either verbally out loud give instructions and they would be recorded, or she would write them down. And from that, the instructions and lessons and information was given to the people here on Earth to build these devices. And now I'm not talking like the devices that we've seen previously with, simple devices, do this and do this. These were fairly complex for their time. And since iDigital Medium indicated that we wanted to help preserve things like this, some information came our way, and it was not a little bit of information. It was boxes and boxes and boxes of information. In among those boxes were lab lessons. They were blue binder booklets that had every single word transcribed of each laboratory lesson. And a laboratory lesson would be defined as people would come in to this space, this workspace, this laboratory. They could be people that they wanted to help raise money. It could be people that were there to explore or learn more about it, or maybe they wanted to volunteer. And when these people came in, the telepathic channel would put on sunglasses. This is going to get really interesting.
Yeah.
She put on sunglasses, and she would begin to talk as if she were other personalities. And here's where it gets really interesting. The personalities, it's a very long list of a who's who in heaven, shall we say. Everybody from Jesus to, President John F. Kennedy, President Theodore Roosevelt, several of the first ladies.
Yeah.
Everybody from General George Patton to Dr. Albert Einstein to Orville and Wilbur Wright. The list goes on and on and on. And I already know some people are probably going to say, what are you talking about? It already sounds a little crazy. All I'm going to say is that when I began reading this material, I sat and looked at it in front of me. At first I thought it was pretty unusual. And then it unravels like a documentary film where you don't know if say, for example, a crime drama, you don't know if the person did it or they didn't do it, or they were set up and then you think they did it, and then you change your mind, you go back the other direction. This is what that story has to offer. The reason why I'm making it public is not really for me, because it's a lot of work. It's because I believe there's educational value, there's historical value, and there may even be some scientific value. Now, I need to make note that the scientific value part of it, I need to clearly state that this should not be another Spiricom. It should not, when people listen to this and read this, they shouldn't go out there and start trying to build exact replicas of Project St. Peter, because it's not likely to be fruitful. Because if it is real, and I state that if, because I don't really know, I wasn't there. If it is real, then it needs to be combined with actual spiritual truths. So let me know if that's too, did I get specific enough or too specific?
All right. That's
great.
Put me back on track.
I think
Great.
we're right where we need to be at, Keith.
Okay. So as I'm sitting here looking at this material, first I realized that it's not on the internet. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And then I realized how much of it there is. And as I start reading it, I'm sitting here looking at it, and I'm realizing that as I open the book and I'm reading the first couple of pages, I'm reading an address by President John F. Kennedy, or at least purportedly, right? And as I read this, there's a little bit of doubt. But there's also a little bit of inside me saying, well, what if? What if this is real? What harm can it do to research it and to read it and to take whatever truths it may or may not have. So the way I perceive it is, we're presenting this as a story. I am not the subject matter expert, though I probably could be viewed as that. I was not there in person. Oh, and I cannot tell you whether it's all true or whether it's not. Actually, I'm not, I've not been in direct contact with anybody who was directly involved in Project St. Peter. It was 33 years ago. But I can tell you that as I read it, I began to see similarities. I began to see things that I knew and felt were spiritual truths. The only question remains as to whether they were truths presented by the medium or whether they were truths presented by people in spirit. I think that once the full scope of how massive this project was, and this was only one project that lasted 2 years, how massive it is, people would say, okay, if it was a hoax, again, it would make Spiritcom look like a walk in the park. If it was a hoax, it was one of the most elaborate hoaxes ever designed, involving at least 100 people, half of those being the alleged spirit communicators, the other half being people here who attended the meetings, who volunteered, who donated money, things of that nature. Okay, I think that's all the...
Yeah. Well, I do want to ask you, I think you may have alluded to it, but I mean, I am curious. Well, you said you guys just received a lot. I don't know how you guys received all these materials. You said that these materials came to you guys in iDigital medium, right? How did you guys come across these? How did they end up in your guys' lap?
Somebody we know in the community contacted me because they had been contacted by the person that was holding the files. After a short exchange, we indicated that we would be interested. And I'm not giving all information because I don't think it's necessary, but the way it happened was extremely strange. I happen to have a brother who lives up north somewhere, and this material, the person said, "How do I get it to you?" I said, "I'll give sake, I'll send you money, or you can mail it." I said, "We don't want to send it by the mail." I said, "Okay." I guess they're rather cautious. So, and they said, "Do you have anybody that can pick it up?" My first thought was, "No, I live in Florida. What do you mean pick it up?"
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like I know anybody. I don't travel up there. I'm not going to hop on my private jet. A couple of days, so it just sat there. A couple of days later, my brother says, "I'm coming down to visit to Florida." And then I put two and two together and realized that this person was not that far from the other person. Long story short, they connected, and it all ended up here of its own accord at no charge.
Cool.
Wow.
And then it was rather surprising at just how much there was. And then we thought that was a lot. It was probably 4 boxes.
Yeah.
It had videotapes, it had audio tapes, and lots and lots and lots of papers. Metascience Foundation was very, very thorough. And we thought it was a lot then. Now I have colleagues in the community who also assist, and we have a passion for preserving everything, but most specifically Metascience Foundation. They have accumulated a lot more of the boxes. And then we've come to find out recently that what we have is only a sliver of what exists. There's a storage facility somewhere that has a lot of stuff that is not accessible presently due to the large amount of expense it would take to be able to acquire it.
I was going to say, what makes it inaccessible, I mean, it's not locked down, though, it sounds like. Am I correct?
It's a condition which would require funds to access it, and so it's more than what we had expected or hoped for. So that is, at the same time, that's the kind of a plea that if there's somebody out there who just wants to throw money our way, we'll go get it. But it's so much that I couldn't even store it at my house. I mean, I thought it was, a little mini library or something, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's bigger than that. So.
Did these all belong to the Metascience Foundation?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
And there was more than one copy. I mean, they even had their own library. I mean, this is how thorough it was. Project St. Peter was so thorough that what I gather happened is the telepathic medium would receive the message, would say it out loud or whatever, it would get recorded. would then be transcribed by somebody on typewriter, letter for letter. Then multiple copies of it would be made, Xerox, for each individual person that had the need to know for that particular part of the project. For Project St. Peter, I don't know how many copies there were, but there was definitely multiple copies. And there were videotapes, recordings that accompanied every single lab. I said, there's so much that we don't even have a full picture yet of how much there was.
Yeah, it sounds like it's an overload. I mean, well, you already said it, very, very thorough documentation. And especially in those times, you know, it wasn't all digital. So a lot of the stuff, obviously being transcribed, that stuff would be on, it's lots and lots of paper, I assume. Right.
It is lots of paper.
They didn't have data warehousing back then. So, you know, so it's a different world now. But okay, fine. So with that being said, as far as I think we should discuss, like kind of set this up as far as when we start going through the chronology of this, some of the at least some of the main points. Like, for example, we mentioned the medium, for example, that we're going to be talking about a lot, Petra, if I'm correct. Who was this medium, I guess, to start? I mean, very briefly, who was this medium?
Sure, there's a quick reference to her on the internet, and I'm not going to easily just give up her shall we say, I was going to say maiden name. I mean her actual name, because she used a pseudonym.
Yeah.
And she's referred to as Petra Damascus. And as the story goes, she appeared on George Meek's doorstep one day. I believe that was written by Mark Macy on the World ITC website. Mm-hmm. And she describes early on in the first lab lesson, which is currently up online, which is what we're going to be referencing today. Mm-hmm. She describes how she was always a telepathic channel, and she was led to George Meek by, I don't have exact specifics. It's a little vague there. Yeah, that's all I got.
That's fine. So, and we kind of already talked about, as far as another point, like how the messages were documented. Obviously, there was, you know, as many means they had at the time: audio, video, transcribing to paper. So there was a lot of copies of this evidence. Let's say these artifacts put into place. But you know, you mentioned also as far as where it's stored. I mean, how did they fund this stuff back then? I mean, we said this happened 33 years ago. How was this being funded?
Sure. I can only expand upon the parts which I know. I do know that there was an individual involved who was associated with the Sun Oil Company. And I do know, I mean, it's listed, and I'm not going to name specifics in some cases because I just think it's not absolutely required.
Yeah.
And I don't want to stick my neck out there too far. But when you read it, you'll see that there are a lot of foundations which were involved. Let me just skip one of that really quick. Some things people will find interesting. Some of the foundations that had representatives that were present at least some of these laboratory lessons regarding Project St. Peter and the building of these devices included IBM, the pharmaceutical company Lilly and Squibb, the ARE, the Edgar Association for Research and Enlightenment, the Quarters Foundation, and there's a couple others, some which still exist today. The Fetzer Foundation.
Yeah, well, IBM is the big one for me.
Yeah, that's like,
the one that really...
Never heard of them. Never heard of them.
I mean, that's the big one for me because, I mean, having done a lot of work professionally with IBM and just being exposed to that stuff my whole professional life, and also knowing a lot of their history.
Yeah, doesn't it go back to the Nazis? And
well, that's one thing they said, that there were the IBM... I'm not saying that that's not tied in with this at all.
No. But I mean, there may be their interest in, I don't know.
Well, I mean, any technology.
Occult subjects or whatever that, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess technology knows no bounds. I mean, if someone's trying to get, IBM's a company. And their number one goal, their driving goal is to make the most money possible, right? Right. My personal opinion, and that's, I mean, I hate to expound on this so much, but my personal opinion, and when I saw IBM, that's kind of what turned all these gears up in my head was, okay, they're obviously involved with this because there may be something that they could use here, not as a weapon of mass destruction,
Right.
but a business tool. I mean,
You
think
know what? No,
about
it's perfect. We got to bring up these points. In fact, we'll be much more comfortable discussing these points because we don't want people to just swallow what I'm providing as a story, hook, line, and sinker, and just think, oh my God, it's got to be real. It's amazing. Let me read every last word and live it. I mean, we have to look at it with an analytical mind, and there's some very, very interesting things when you start looking at it that way.
Yeah, I mean,
and you're right. What if what's everybody's motives? It's always going to come into play.
Well, I mean, the big rule of business is, the idea of business is you're able to see 10 steps in front of you. That's how you get the edge, and that's how you make more money than your competitor.
Well,
right?
can you imagine your stock prices going up if you're like, we just came up with a device that you can talk to the dead with, and it works?
Well, that, and also
what?
maybe not even just that. I'm not talking about making some super product. I'm talking about actually having access to things that give them an edge in a market. That may be just as important as going, hey guys, our new, our Watson server systems we have here now can actually contact the afterlife. I mean,
you could do some catchy slogans.
Oh,
with
it's
that.
crazy, yeah.
Our servers are so good they contact the
But
dead.
on that point, it was interesting to see that IBM was present at this thing. But the other thing too with this, another question, another idea we want to point out here is, I mean, why? I mean, and this is going to be, I'm going to lay this out probably very vague, and I apologize, but why go to these extravagant lengths? We've only touched on this a little bit so far, but this obviously was something that a lot of time was put into, a lot of documentation was being collected, right? Why go to these great lengths, let's just say?
That's a good question. And so as we go through this story, and as we look at it, and hopefully some people take the time to read it, because we won't be able to come to a judgment. And even then, you won't be able to come to a judgment until you've seen the whole picture. And even then, we might not have the whole picture. But from my perspective, we can view it as one of two ways. Not that everything's black and white, but either the whole thing was faked by the medium, and she fooled 60 to 100 people, and they spent years of their lives following her, right? Mm-hmm. Or it's real, right?
Yeah.
And so when you read all these different things, and granted, then again, too, we do have to acknowledge that in any form of mediumship, there's always a part of the medium's psyche mentality that comes through. So while we like to think it's pure, it doesn't necessarily mean that it always is. So there could be a little bit of an element of that too that we'll have to just eyeball as we go through it.
Yeah.
But with Spiricom, I know there was a gentleman that looked at it closely and came to the understanding or perspective that they thought it was a hoax, it was fraud, things like that. But the amount of research done into that, is dwarfed by the amount of research that would be required for this. Just to give you an idea, I don't know how many labs there are. I know it spanned over a year and a half. There are at least 14 lab books. There's probably at least 1,000 pages, and that's just the laboratory books themselves. There's also audio cassettes. There's VHS tapes.
Yeah.
And you've got to wonder, so say if you are a medium and you're employed by George Meek, which I believe she was. I don't have any records of that, but there were paid staff. I don't know what their compensation was, but it appears she was full time in this job for at least a year and 3/4.
One thing I want
if she was paid, what would be the point of going to this great length?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Why would you stand in front of people from organizations such as IBM and put on sunglasses and act like you're channeling somebody? I mean, wouldn't you be scared to do that? I mean, you'd have to be really, really out there.
Well, and to a couple of your points here also, Keith. As far as what you mentioned a second ago, like documentation, I have Mark Macy, God, that had been about 13, 14 years ago now, longer than that. Mr. Macy was nice enough to give me a copy. It's a condensed recordings. It's a more or less, I would call it a sizzle reel, I guess you want to call it, something like that. of the Spiricom recordings, right? There's an expanded, I know there's expanded recordings, like, less chopped up, but he gave me like the hour long, with a lot of, the high excerpts from the Spiricom recordings. Now, the reason I mention that is that he sent me the cassette, and it's a Metascience cassette. It's labeled Metascience Foundation.
Right.
So my point is
legit.
like, I'm like, okay, this isn't, and it didn't. I mean, it's a label. It's a printed label. Like this was sent somewhere to be pressed proper, and it's done by an organization, right? That's not saying that everything's true. I mean, I'm as open-minded as the next guy is. But to your point on that, I mean, I'm just wanted to put that out there also. Like, I have a copy of this cassette still. It was given to us, and I still have it in my archives, right? And
not only that, George Meek held a press conference with the press, the actual news press, on Spiricom. So he wasn't playing around. I mean, I don't think there's any question as to whether George Meek was an honorable man. I think as this story unfolds, and maybe other stories, we might come to discover that he had, really good heart, and perhaps sometimes might have been overly trusting. But then again, I'm not the man, and I was not in his shoes. Yeah.
So one thing also, we're getting there. We promise, people. We mentioned a few minutes ago the list of people kind of involved with this thing on what would be the heaven side of things. And and as I agree, let's refer to that. It's a simple word to use to keep this thing straight in our minds. And the list was pretty impressive. And I'll say the same thing. When I read this initially, my eyes opened up. I'm like, this is a list of pretty big names. We already mentioned, we mentioned John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, General George S. Patton, and there's a handful of people on this list. Michael, is that? No, that's somebody else. Is it Michelangelo?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, Einstein, Madame Curie.
Okay, so I'm just flying through the list right now. This is just a couple people, right?
Right.
So, and it's something that we wrote down about this was, well, why isn't it just John Smith, who worked at EDS for 30 years and then passed away, and and then he retired for a few years down in Florida, and then he had a heart attack when he was fishing and he passed away, and why isn't it just that? Why isn't it just somebody who's not a famous person?
Bob.
Why is this list all people that, I mean, and these are influential people? Einstein, Michelangelo, these guys kind of made a dent. They kind of made their mark, right? So why? Whoa.
Sorry.
Was that your speaker?
Accident. Missed that.
That tripped me out.
Headphones became unplugged.
So, I mean, why aren't there any non-famous people involved with this thing? Like I said, like John Smith or somebody,
Well, I have the same analytical understanding in that whenever you see a who's who or what do they call it? There's terminology for that, slang for name dropping. It makes you always wonder, okay, what about everybody else? The famous celebrities represent what small percentage of the people that live and exist. So I think for that one, we're just going to have to wait to see. We're going to have to wait until later on. So it is something we look at. We say, okay, it's almost like this. It's okay. There are famous people involved. We don't see any laymen. Okay, Mark 1 in the not such a great. How do I describe this? When you're marking up points for a side during the team or a game or something like that. When we view something like this mentally, we can observe it and say, okay, this looks like it's likely, maybe to not be mediumship, whereas this looks like it's definitely unique and strange information that they either wouldn't know or it just seems unusual that a person could know all of this. And so I think that's one of those things, only having famous people, that's something that to me goes in the right-hand column of, I'm going to observe this with an analytical eye and see what happens. And that's just what we're going to have to do for that particular question.
Well, to be fair, I mean, with Spiricom, stepping back to that for a second again, Doc Mueller wasn't,
That's a good point.
He wasn't some
was not.
famous guy. I mean, he had a life. He was a person at one time, but he wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't an influential person in history. He was just a regular guy. So I mean,
he wrote an army manual.
Yeah, I mean, he did cool stuff, but again, he wasn't a president. He wasn't a world-renowned artist. He wasn't a general in an army. He was a guy, right? So I mean, that's just something to think about. I mean, analytically, that's a fact with that thing. So we mentioned the materials a few minutes ago, and preservation of these materials you mentioned a few minutes ago also, and you say they're at risk. Why are they at risk?
They're at risk because you know what? Let's come back to that in a minute. Is that okay?
That's fine with me.
I need to expound into an area real quick for a minute. So far, I know people are listening. They might be saying, but what is it? Like we haven't even described what it is. And unfortunately, it's so interesting that it's hard to explain it to you unless you read it. But it starts off by an opening by the medium. It then goes into an address by President John F. Kennedy. And he talks on a lot of different subjects. Let me see if I could find maybe a paragraph that is of
that'd be cool.
Importance. One of the first things, let's see.
No, I mean,
and I want to clarify something. At each of these labs, is Petra using a special device that was created to connect with the other side, or is just straight up trance mediumship?
Straight up trance mediumship that would provide the instructions for the technical device.
Okay.
Kind of like a helping hand.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so, this is so hard to describe. It is so massive. So basically, instructions are given. The reason why they're called lab classes and the reason why they were documented, and you have to wonder when you read these and you look at the way it's written, it's almost like they knew it would be a long time before anything would ever be done with it. It's almost like they knew it needed to be documented. So somebody somewhere down the road would be able to figure out what the important principles were.
Okay.
So not only did they give technical principles, and I mean specific technical principles, not like, okay, go buy a coil of wire, get a voltage meter, apply current at 2 amps. They did that, but it was much more specific than that. It was how big the room is, what the orientation of the room is, the feng shui, everything about static electricity, vibration, considerations were given for heat. The description of it is very interesting. And there's pictures. They went so far as to make little hand models of the unfinished prototypes of the actual device. So not only did they make the device, they made Mini-Me. And they would use that to try to go out and describe to potential investors, I imagine, as well as perhaps volunteers, what this would do. And one of the devices actually looks like a satellite dish. And here's the interesting thing. I need to a lot of this is clickbait. A lot of things that I say with the names and mentioning things, it is to get people interested. So you'll take that extra step of reading it and determining whether or not it's something you want to add to your knowledge of experience. Let's see. Toroids. You guys ever heard of toroids?
No.
It's kind of like a donut. So it's an energy field with a donut. So they also make. There's a component named a toroid that has basically, it's like a donut, has a wire wrapping around it. It's kind of an infinite thing. If you look at it a different way, from a different perspective, it appears to be like a black hole. There are references to time and space travel, but they actually call it time translation. All right. And one of the devices looks like a satellite dish, and it has these little toroids, which were presented to be certain sizes, using certain gauge wire, to be certain width apart, to have certain cooling liquids to be shot through them so that they didn't overheat. I mean, it was exact. And they were so formal that, say you had a question, say you're building this device, you got a question. You didn't just, email George Meek because he didn't have email. You would handwrite a formal note attached to that project, you would designate who it was you were trying to communicate with, who you were, what the date and time was, and you would indicate what question you had, which would then be passed all the way physically to the telepathic medium, I believe, who would then receive the answer, and the process would go all the way back to the person, and it would all be typed, transcribed, mailed, the whole 9 yards. I mean, formal. It wasn't like pick up the phone, hey, what do I do with this capacitor?
Yeah.
In addition to the technical side, there's a spiritual element. And this is more important than the whole document itself. Because, and this is the part in I chalk in column 1 for the amount of information that was given seems to be so, it feels correct to me. It describes how there is structure and order in the universe. There are hierarchies. There are organizational boundaries. There are organizations in heaven or paradise that have specific jobs, duties, functions, just like we do here. It's a whole structure. Everybody's not just hanging out, fishing, listening to the radio. And they describe these labs are a marriage, a combination of spiritual knowledge and science, physical laws matched with technology. So it's not just a document, 1,000 pages on how to create this awesome device. It's instruction for average people like you and me. I mean, I could read it and I could understand most of the concepts with very, very specific wording. They chose their words very carefully. And as people read it, they'll see that things are said a certain way for a certain reason to evoke a certain feeling from us. Those are the important parts. Those are why, as I sat there and looked at it, I'm like, this has to get out to the public. It can't just sit and rot away. That's not doing anybody a good. And so it's a marriage of technology and spiritual information. You will find information there, like I said, related to time translation. That's how they refer to time travel. What's interesting is the technical device, one of them, had a laser that would conjugate back on itself. So it would do this big loop and it would come back and join its original laser, kind of like a feedback loop.
Yeah.
With a video ITC. It's interesting to note that there's a lot of technical descriptions that give a deeper understanding into ITC methods, including video ITC, that are mentioned in detail here. A lot of, and then when you look at this whole picture, then you realize, okay, if this wasn't real, this one person, a woman, was able to spend 2 years of her life, probably daily or a good portion of time, relaying information that she either had to know from books or just had to be an extremely well-rounded, educated person in all aspects, and had to maintain that facade for that duration of time. And then we get into the little kickers, the little things. We may find in some lessons that there would be indications that information came through the medium that assisted George or assisted other people with personal things they were having, with health issues, with events that were going on in their lives. There's all kinds of references to things that indicate what you see on the surface is not necessarily all that's there.
I feel like
questions?
It reminds me of Edgar Cayce a bit.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
That whole process of him going into trance and then, giving out all this health advice and information and even things about the future and, hey, there's stuff under the Sphinx's paw and that kind of thing. It just reminds me of that. And then the fact that the ARE was interested in this makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
We've called this, the validity of this into question, I mean, just in conversation here, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we're all on the same page that we're looking at this analytically, that this is a story. But, once we're kind of just getting into the weeds of this thing, even at the podcast level that we're doing this on,
Right.
it just observing it from the outside, there's a lot of effort, as we've already said, being put into this. And you just said something, I don't want to be crass about this, but I tell people this often. It's a really hard job to be a bullshitter all the time. I mean, I don't know any nice way to say it.
You got to be really good.
Yeah,
right?
it's a really difficult job. You have to know how to cover your tracks. You have to know how to explain your way out of situations. Some people, this is how they make their living. Some people, this is how they live their lives, right? It's tough.
Right, and then you look at some of the, I mean, I don't want to draw bad parallels here, but people that are labeled psychopath, I mean, they can tell lies, they can make up their own fiction, they can believe it, but they can't go on forever without you seeing through them. And their stories can't always match up, and that's the interesting thing.
Yeah. I mean, and that's just the one thing I observed here with that is just it's hard to be able to maintain something like that for all this time.
Right, and then there's other things. We know that George Meek was somewhat of a thorough man. I mean, he didn't just run around the world finding people that did things and say, "Hey, let me watch it one time," and then say, "Wow, you're amazing. Come work with me." I mean, he had vetting processes. He had different things. He worked with more than one medium over the course. A lot of the things that he learned, in fact, I'd be willing to say he worked with mediums throughout the course of his work. That's what he did. And so I would say that it couldn't be easy to fool him. And he ended up putting a lot of his own money into this. I mean, his money dried up in this project and the Metascience Foundation before it was all said and done. He had nothing.
Yeah.
Or I make an assumption, but we can see that he was about out of money. He put a lot of his own money into it. So he was also personally invested.
Yeah. So, all right. Lab Class 1. Been pointing over to this a bunch of times. February 5th, 1986. I think we've kind of touched into it already. But do we want to kind of just go through? I mean, I think we already opened. You said that this opened up with John Kennedy with a speech, basically, correct? As far as the chronology of the events here, and I'm just kind of looking at our notes we have here right now. 21 people is called that. And the 21 people we're talking about, as far as that's on the heaven side, correct? And that's the list we kind of went through a little bit, and that's what Petra named. Do I have that correct, Keith?
Not in this case. There's actually there was 54 people in heaven, at least on this one specific council.
Yeah.
It's hard to follow along with the names because this is like an episode of Star Trek. As I'm reading it, we've got Alpha Unit Earth 1, which is we've got Alpha Unit Earth 2, which is the people on Earth here. We've got Science Team 7.
Yeah.
But see, not Science Team 1 or 2 or 3, 7, which is interesting. Let me see here. Let me scroll down into this. There is all kinds of interesting things, and it makes you wonder why go to that extreme. I mean, the farther we go in, the more you have to wonder, is it real?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It makes for such interesting reading. I mean, there's the Solar Cross Federation. There's organizations that are administrative bodies. They're called Paradise Governing Councils. One of those councils is the Presidio Council, of which President John F. Kennedy and other people are a member of. So it's not like we can just say, oh, it's Keith from My Digital Medium. It's actually different people serving on different boards, organizations, councils, receiving instructions from different levels. It's kind of like the military.
Yeah.
Which it's kind of forgotten, left out. There's actually an organizational chart, which we will be sharing soon, that shows what the vision for Metascience and Project St. Peter was to be. And there was connections with the U.S. government, the Department of the Interior. They wanted to send medical advice to help people. They wanted to send device that would probably help, information that would probably help us with, global warming and things of, economic impact. Mm-hmm. There were all these different areas, and the information was to be segmented and separated out to go to its respective sub-organization or routing. I mean, it was complex.
Yeah. I'm looking at, we mentioned Kennedy and kind of his opening comments with the initial contact, I think. He describes his involvement in an effort he refers to as Actions for Peace. JFK, and this would have been very topical at the time. JFK references the NASA Space Shuttle Challenger, and he indicates that all Spirit people witnessed the Challenger tragedy, which was right around that time, I think. I don't know the exact dates off the top of my head, but I know that was something that happened at the time. That's interesting to me because all Spirit people observed this. Well, what made that special? Was it just that at the time it was kind of happened around the same time that Project St. Peter was happening, and they wanted to say, hey, sorry about that whole thing that went with the Challenger thing. That was really a tragedy. I don't know if that's what he was trying to say, or was it that it was something that was they noticed that was really bad. It was something that we really are sorry that you guys had to witness as people. That was something that had me kind of thinking, what made the Challenger tragedy so special?
Yeah, I need to expand upon that. Do you remember? Do you remember that?
I was in elementary school and they sent us home that day. Yeah, I remember it very well.
Me too.
Yeah, it was a really sad day. It was. Well, the fact that nowadays I think. And maybe this is what makes it stick in our heads, and maybe that's why this was called out by Kennedy in this thing, because nowadays videos of disturbing things are thrown around like draft beer at a frat party. I mean, it's
right.
You can go on any social media outlet and watching somebody get the living hell beat out of them. Right, which when a few years ago I thought, oh, that's pretty funny, but now it bothers me. It's hard to watch someone just get the crap kicked out of them. Right. However, I think that there is the essence of that is just desensitizing people to a certain degree that they don't even respond to things like that. Now, going back to the Challenger tragedy. That video it's available far and wide now. Pictures are available far and wide, and they were available back then. With this happened on national live TV. The damn thing exploded, and watching the rockets shoot off the side of the main booster, just kind of going in some weird, wild direction. The whole thing was a horror to watch. As a kid, I didn't quite understand it that much. I knew it was something bad. People died. But as an older man now, imagining what was happening in that cockpit, right?
Right.
That's what makes me, and just the images themselves, going back to the idea that we didn't see stuff like that back then. That's something you didn't see very often, like a disaster like that happened in front of your eyes on live TV in front of you. Now it's you see it all the time. It's easy to see.
Yeah, and there's there's lots of spoiler alerts. I'm gonna have to try to remember myself to not give up because I can't keep a secret for squat when it comes to, especially with my wife. At least I tell her that. But it was the reference to Space Shuttle Challenger was mentioned in terms of compassion. And later on, I can't remember which lesson because it's so much I'm relearning as I go through it because I've only been through it once. And there are references later on to technical implications surrounding why it crashed, why the issue was present, why the tragedy occurred.
Well, here, I don't mean to cut you off, Keith, but I just, I do have the internet in front of me. I did look in January 28th, 1986, and Lab 1 happened on, I just had it, February 5th, 1986. So we're talking a week or two, right? So that's,
very fresh.
I mean, so we could easily say, like, well, this was just topical at the time. That would be the easy way to say it. Like, hey, how are you? Sorry about the thing that happened a while back, because that was a global disaster, not a global disaster, but that was a disaster that was recognized by the world, right?
Sure. So back to the analytical mind.
Yeah.
The part of me says, okay, they mentioned the Space Shuttle Challenger. It's more clickbait. I'm just going to use that term very loosely.
Yeah.
It's more clickbait. So mark a chalk mark up in the right-hand column for, not evidential to me personally. However, we have to wait and see to when it's referenced again to see what's said about it to make a full assessment.
No, yeah, agreed 100%. I'm just kind of going through our notes again here too, moving forward. Sure. Holy winds is a reference to the science definition of the ethers. JFA indicates there are, and this is what we mentioned a minute, I mentioned there are 53 more people working closely with him. JFK begins listing 10 areas of communication and the associated team chairman. And this is what you were talking. You said you guys are going to release like kind of like a chart of this, the layout, right?
We will. I mean, it's kind of the thing where I wanted to mention this earlier. There's so much to remember. This information, I've become aware of it for the last 2 years. It took me that long. First of all, decide, was it supposed to be public? Was it okay to make it public?
Yeah.
And it's been 33 years. So as I look at it, I kind of realize over time, it took a while for me to say, okay, maybe it's okay. Because I mean, especially when there's different people's names listed and opinions of things. And I mean, who knows? But I just lost my train of thought.
That's
okay. No, this is a lot we're trying to bite off.
Well,
here,
and you think about things like this. So these documents that have been hidden in a warehouse or someone's basement forever, they're not readily available on the internet. And all of a sudden, by some chance happening, the people that have them can meet up with your brother and deliver them down to you in Florida. And you like to think of these conductors on the other side. Maybe they're facilitating this. Maybe
not only that, but there's references to technical implications that, shall we say, mirrors aspects of my work that I don't think everyone would recognize. Not to say I'm overly special. However, there are things in it that there are parallels which are surprising. Let's see. Okay, so we can keep going down that list.
Yeah.
Boys, so I mean, just think of what it would have had to have taken. So he just listed off different areas of communication and the associated person in spirit that was responsible to act as one of the head people of that particular team.
Correct.
Right? So, So say it was science, then Dr. Albert Einstein was one of the primary leaders of that particular group. So you've got whatever governing bodies, and then you've got the councils, which then roll down to the other councils, which then roll down to teams, science teams, which then get branched out to other teams. You got to wonder, okay, so if you're going to try to make a name for yourself or whatever the case may be, you're going to sit there and you're going to draw up a chart of organizations. Let's just call it, the Spaceship Alliance Fleet, Spock. Just imagine what that would have to take to sit there and to go through all this list and then to try to remain consistent over time.
Well,
without a computer.
The one thing that kind of, and I say disturbed in a funny manner with this, because, I'm looking at just the simple list here we have in the notes. Fine arts, Michelangelo, medical team, Rudolf Steiner, law enforcement team, Bobby Kennedy, right? And you say that this kind of branches off from, into, smaller, lower levels of the hierarchy, right? The thing that I'm like, so what I find funny is we mentioned the thing about why is it these people? Why is it famous people or influential people? And I found it kind of funny, like, wow, this, and I don't know any nice way to say it. This looks like this could become a really nasty bureaucracy really quick, with all these with all these layers of people. I mean, we both know this, and Amber knows this. If you do any type of work for a bigger company, layers and layers of things you have to go through just to get a simple thing done sometimes can be just painful, right? And that's a direct result of kind of what we're seeing here is like layers and layers. However, I mean, maybe that's the only way that things can really work is when you compartmentalize people into smaller jobs, right? Give them law enforcement, right? This is going to be your thing. So because, I mean, and to be fair, I mean, no one person, or not even like a team of 5 people in this case, could know everything or take all these different jobs, right? So maybe you do have to take, like we do here, say, okay, well, we need an expert on. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's bring that. Okay, so law enforcement.
Yeah.
Law enforcement? I mean, out of all the things, could it be like, I don't know, liaison between the Universal Symphony and the, I mean, law enforcement? Why such a plain thing? I mean, I'd be curious to find out what is people in spirits' perspective on law enforcement?
Well,
do you mean like prevention? Do you mean like the psychology? I mean, what exactly?
That's probably why I'm pointing that one out too, because that when I saw that, I'm like, well, what the hell? What laws are
those
we breaking?
secret things like spirits aren't supposed to do, like just randomly appear to you. You know, like that's why we don't see them, or they get in trouble. Like if they actually pulled your hair, like they actually got a ticket on the other side. You know, like just, I always think of like weird stuff like that, like.
Well, it's all funny, but you raise an interesting point, though.
Houdini's wife dies, and she can't. Was it his wife or no? Was it his mom or what's the famous?
What?
Houdini. When Houdini died, was it his wife?
That was his wife. Yeah.
Okay, so when she dies, you know, she's like, "Oh, hey guys, hey, I gotta go bring a message back to my husband." Oh, no, you can't. Like, oh crap, you know, because that's what the spirit police say. But I don't know. It's kind of fun to think about. It's like a sci-fi
novel. It's fun to think about. However, Keith, I want to throw. This is going to be asked, right? We have to say this because not too far down from the list we were talking about here, JFK says he's been in communication with George Meek for 17 months at this time, right? Putting the initial contact date approximately July 1985. JFK describes an instrument that is a highly sophisticated electronic crystalline instrument designed by man in collaboration with the high order of intelligence of paradise. Okay, that sounds really cool, and I want to talk more about that. However, yeah. And this is not a question towards you. This is probably a rhetorical question. However, I think it needs to be said out there though too.
Sure.
Why the hell do we have to go through all this? Why couldn't? Okay, look, guys, we're in heaven. You guys are on earth, and here's a whole bunch of stuff that you're screwing up. So we're just somebody's gonna come down here. They're gonna appear. I don't know any way how to say it. They're going to appear, and they're going to give you proof that they're from heaven. Dude, I'm from heaven. Here's my card. All right?
Oh, see, therein lies one of the main issues
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
We're making the assumption that they want to prove to us that there's life after death.
Yeah.
Okay. That's why I want to ask the question. I'm not doing this. I'm not debating. I want to understand this too. Go ahead.
This is something I'm not fully expressing, and I cannot express as well as the words that are written on the paper, is the amount of compassion and that sentence you just said, the specificity, that's a hard word to say, of why did they word it that way? Highly sophisticated electronic crystalline instrument designed by man in collaboration with the high order intelligence of paradise. Couldn't you just say device?
Yeah.
Right. So why that specific choice of words? Does it have meaning? And I mean, I'm a Virgo, so perhaps I'm at fault for looking too into everything. You know, I'll read something and say why, and I'm like, why? You know.
Yeah.
But I mean, we look at the fine tooth details throughout the entire lab books. The message that comes through, far more importantly than any technical knowledge, is they want to help humanity learn. They want to help humanity understand science, the limitations. They actually go into descriptions, and they go into what would I call that? You know, they would do setups of experiments that were meant to be visual aids to describe to people exactly what these scientific terms of energy, what they meant. They went to great lengths to keep everything in its own specific terminology. They didn't try to make people feel stupid. Though there is a little bit of interesting personality quirks that come through later on. Mm-hmm. But the overall message is, and the reason why I had to move forward with at least getting this out there somehow, the overall message is we are here to help you should you want to help yourselves. The same general theme that we have with ETs, other life forms, aliens. It's the same message in here.
It's person to person too. That's the idea of therapy and helping people in general. Look, you gotta want to help yourself before. Really, I'm here to help you, but you gotta want to help yourself too. So it's an open arm. They're open arms, and it's kind of, to me, uncanny how similar those ideas are. And I guess it goes to that idea, as on earth as it is in heaven. If you want to throw it that way, it all kind of is related when it comes to those ideas.
That's another interesting thing. It's not in this lesson that we have up online right now, which is Lab 1, Part 1. But as I was making notes today, they actually said everything that happens here in your earth understanding or your perception, already happened in heaven.
Oh, okay.
And I believe that was a hint at the Akashic Records.
I was going to say, yeah, that's like, yeah.
The reference.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or like even other dimensions or something. Like there's some science there.
Well, okay. JFK says the purpose of this instrument is an instrument of electronic communication so far in its technical advancement that it could well assist the all-time swings that science has found, discovered, and noted. Reference to, and you put that in your notes here, Keith, reference to time travel, right?
Right. At least how we perceive time travel. We have a different notion of it due to Hollywood movies, but time travel itself could probably be defined as a good luck with that one, Keith.
Yeah.
As a different understanding of the perception of time. That's all. The way I compare it to is if you're looking, say there's a grocery store, you know how they have all the aisles? Mm-hmm. If you're standing at the end of one aisle looking down, you only see one aisle. But if you move back another 100 feet, say outside the store, and they have glass windows, you can now see down all 50 aisles. I think of this like that. That's my best analogy.
Yeah. JFK indicates the instrument will have the crystalline quartz capacity to translate time. I just saw this when you were mentioning that. Opening a corridor.
And there's actually... correct. That's the essence of it, opening a portal. Portal's a buzzword these days, but essentially that's what they said. And you got to look at the terminology. He also says universes, plural, not universe. There's a lot of interesting things that you got to wonder. These days we're like, oh, that's pretty cool, but you got to think 33 years ago, some of these things were truly revolutionary. Oh, yeah. If it's okay right now, I think I'd like to read one paragraph just because it might give a good feeling, perception.
All you.
And this is JFK. This is what's purported to be a channeling of President John F. Kennedy. He says, Our Science 7 team is now simply prepared, given Divine Paradise permission to commence and complete this divine instrument that shall challenge science, shall have the crystalline quartz electronic capacity to translate time, and thus a corridor shall be opened by the utilization of every science law known to man and the unfoldment of every law known to the universal paradise civilizations. And through that corridor of light and sound, in a visual, you, the members of the IBM Corporation, ARE, Quartus, Metascience, Fetzer, Lilly, and Squibb, and on down the list, each of you shall be offered an opportunity to submit your own questions, though there shall only be one day out of 7 where individuals may ask questions. As you see, there's already been prepared a refined course of knowledges to be sent to Earth to help you and your fellow Americans, to help all countries of the world. End paraphrase, or end quote.
Connection.
Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't just say, we're going to make a device, we're going to help you out. He goes into detail. Every word is very carefully chosen. It's carefully chosen, and this is what I recognize, not just so that people reading it will think it's genuine. It's carefully chosen because they know it's going to be analyzed by people of a scientific and analytical mind who are going to take the terminology and the wording and analyze it and inspect it and flip it around and upside down every which way, and they know that, and you can tell when you read it.
Well, here's another thing to point out, too. he notes that participants will be able to submit questions 1 out of every 7 days, right? And then after that, he says, knowledge and information has already been prepared to send to Earth. So to me, that's like cart before the horse, right? But what that says to me is they may already know what we're going to, well, not may, they probably already know what we're going to ask. And they have all this stuff prepared and ready to go. And it'll be more or less, oh, that's the question. Okay, we'll send it. You see what I'm saying? On a more simple level, I guess. It seems to me that the way that was worded, it says that we already know what you're going to ask.
Definitely. I mean, haven't you ever wondered? This is a small capsule version of what I feel might be true in my perspective of the world and life. Doesn't it seem that the reason that the Akashic Records exist and the reason that when we have readings with mediums, and I've had a lot, by the way, and they come up with all these details that end up happening, doesn't it seem like what we're, and since there's also hints at people from the past coming to us, people from our future selves coming back, helping us, things like that.
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem like we're living our lives and then we're going back and we're reliving it again and rewriting it over and over and over until it's perfect or back to the beginning again?
Yeah.
Do you ever get that sense?
Yeah, I do. I feel, I mean, if you want to keep it really goofy, I mean, deja vu, things like that. There's times I feel like I'm reliving something that I never really lived before. I felt that at times in my life. I can't explain it. And maybe that is something that I'm being tested by some greater universal thing that says, all right, you did this before and you cocked it up. So we're going to run you through this exercise again and see, and you should have learned, in the greater span of things, let's say, and this time around you should do better. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. And that's just one perspective on that's just me. However, I'm scanning down the notes here again. JFK references a short prepared dissertation that he personally delivered on January 28th, 1986.
I don't have any specifics as to where he delivered that yet. However, as I go through this, and obviously that was in close or quick succession following that
was the same day.
Was the date?
That was the same day as the Challenger disaster. That just stuck out. I just looked at it a second ago. I'm like, oh, that's kind of okay. That's weird. No, that's cool. I just noticed that was kind of
and
uncanny.
We have all these questions, and I'm hoping some people in the future will read this and say, "Oh, I noticed this," or "Oh, I noticed that." Maybe we'll make some kind of. I kind of look at this text as I don't want to draw parallels again because they're bad examples, but it's like a Bible or like the lost Dead Sea Scrolls for ITC.
Yeah.
The kind of thing that if a collaborative group of people come together, read it and say, this is of value, whether or not it was real.
Yeah.
It's of value. And that's another thing I forgot to mention earlier. Even if the whole thing's fraud, the whole thing's fake, it still has educational value because we would look at the past. We would say, here's what happened.
Yeah.
If this guy was led on, here's the result. The people that were hurt and the things that occurred. Here's something we need to be more careful with in the future, right? If it's real, it's amazing. If it's fake, it's still amazing.
It's history.
It's history, yeah.
Yeah, it's history. And we're going to repeat our mistakes if we don't learn from it. Yeah, we could be in the same shoes again. You ever meet people in life, and as you meet them, you're like, they remind me of this other personality I know. They look like them. They've got the quirks. They've got all these things. It's like a reiteration or continuation of the same person.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, several times.
This is kind of like that. I think if this happened back then, we now see people in the paranormal and ITC communities accepting the energy factor, accepting more of a natural, we all can do this kind of thing. What's going to happen? We're creating an energy field right now. What's going to happen when these miracles start to happen again? They're already starting to happen, and it is coming now. Are we ready this time to understand why the technical devices can help us? are we still in the old school thought of, I'm going to prove everything, I just have to make something that works and is awesome?
Well, I think we may have had this conversation before, Keith, when we talked last time. And as far as how we are as people and how we think and where we're going as people, it's a pretty easy thing to say, I guess, that, well, just 50 years ago, I could have never imagined having something in my hand that when I touch it, it responds to me, right?
Right.
For better or for worse nowadays. But we're seeing things here. What I always point this one out. I point this out all the time. I thought the idea, when I used to watch Star Trek and stuff when I was a kid, the idea that those guys could talk, in a microphone and look at a screen and have a two-way communication with someone with audio and video in sync was mind-blowing to me. It was just,
Right.
It was the coolest thing ever, right? And we can do that now. I can set up something on any little laptop on my smartphone and do that. People do that all the time now. I don't really neglect that, I guess. I see it for what it is, like, wow, that's a technical wonder right there. Somebody made that work. Where are we going?
It is, and you got to wonder if okay, I mean, there's so many things come at me so fast. I'm going to try to hit them all. Number one, when we hear a crystalline structure, we're like, okay, big deal. It's a crystal. Everybody's got them. They're everywhere now. And it's true. They are. I've got one right here you could fit like 5 of them on my pinky thumbnail. But so that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is, it's a good time for me now to mention another paragraph that I just scrolled down to. And I know this is like an ADD person's party, because we get to just bounce around, no particular order. But it's kind of what we got to do to keep it interesting.
No, and we're discussing this, and we're kind of going down the list. But I'm cool with going. Let's hear this. What you wanted to put out there,
sure.
Please.
On page 20, President John F. Kennedy, as channeled through the telepathic channel, he says, quote, "These excerptions are to be noted by the science nobles, attesting to the true faith clause of earnestly desiring peace on earth as divinely compassionate free gifts of knowledge sent directly to them. In this holy action, a reviewer with a modicum of scientific knowledge or technical basic understandings of the unexplained energies that control, regulate, vitalize, and support the atmospheric energies of Earth may well be choked with Thanksgiving." Right? So
yeah,
they go to great lengths to describe, in essence, what that was saying. And I feel like I'm translating the Bible. I really do. I mean, I grew up with that, and I don't currently study it, but it reminds me of reading a paragraph and taking it apart bit by bit and understanding what's being said. They're basically saying we're doing what we're doing, so scientists will read what we're doing. If they believe in what we believe in, which is an end to war, peace for all, then they can have peace. We're going to give them these free gifts. And they're also saying we're making it less complicated. We're explaining terms of science in a way that is understandable to anybody that has even a basic understanding of knowledge. And granted that we all work with computers these days, I could say that most of what's in here is understandable. And there's even, not only are there these labs, there's also communications, audio cassettes, VHS tapes. There could be like, okay, today's Monday. Okay, Keith, there's a special message today. Today's message is on the thermodynamic principles of energy surrounding such and such, such and such. And they'll actually deliver a fully technical paper in regards to that one particular scientific principle.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. If you're trying to fake something, I mean, why would you take on tasks like that? I mean, could you imagine, because there were some scientific people among the people that were involved. It wasn't just all, there were people that obviously didn't work in computers, but just were not technically minded whatsoever.
Yeah.
They had their own different gifts. There were people that were secretaries, people that did administrative tasks, and people that built models, people that researched properties, wrote up pamphlets, got parts. There's all kinds of crazy stuff. And each of them was described as having their own specific particular role to play. And as we go through the lessons, a lot of them, which are telepathically communicated by Dr. Albert Einstein, at least as we perceive it, he gives lessons and descriptions of things, and sometimes it seems like he's almost belittling, but kind of like in the fond way that a teacher would do, like a professor. They would give you concepts, and it wasn't always perfect that you understood what they were trying to convey, but it was always in a mostly humble, loving, and compassionate manner, which is hard to do. I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd have to train myself to be that.
Yeah.
Well-spoken or understanding of how people can perceive things. But they took very special care to make sure that they worded everything a very specific way.
Well, here's the thing with that. As you're saying this, what their goal is here. The basis of any type of way of marketing technology is simply put in the fact, trying to string this together. The basis of marketing technology is to make complicated things that do amazing things very simple for people. All right? I that's the best way I can say it. When it comes to working on computers and technology and stuff like that, yeah, I know personally what I do. A lot of what I do during the day is to explain things to people in a different manner than just going through all the technical babble, right? I do break it down and make things simple for people. What technology has done for people and what we're experiencing now is this idea, like I said, two-way communication with video and audio in sync together, right? Simple thing. It seems like such a simple idea, but you can't expect the average person, a person who works in construction or something. And I'm not, nothing I'm saying here is belittling anybody in their trade, right? But you can't expect an average person who works in a construction site and does work like that to understand the finer points of telephony, right? So you have people who said, well, hey, you know what? I mean, at least what our interests are as people is, hey, you know what? This would be something people could find really useful and find really cool. So let's find an easy way to make this really simple for them. And we can market this, and we could probably make a lot of money doing this, right? And then we get something like Skype, which does exactly that. And I can go and download Skype for free and set up an account, and I can use Skype. It's what we're using right now, as a matter of fact. Because people put some time into that, and they worked on it and got it to the point where it's very simple to use. You don't have to understand how a microprocessor works or how telephony works anymore. It's already done. That work is done, right? So, taking that idea, and it applies exactly to what we're talking about here. The finer points of instrumental transcommunication with spirits, with whatever name we want to call them. We both know that, I mean, with what knowledge I have, and I am I'm a layman, I've got my experience, but I don't know all the finer points of that stuff. I don't. We have people that are saying, or spirits that are saying, we know you can't figure it out. We're going to help you. We're going to make it simple for you, okay? Except the difference with this is they're saying they're doing it. They just want to do it for free. You guys but my where my mind goes is back to the why of this thing. Do these people or these spirits, famous or not famous, see something in front of them for us that may not be very good? And are they trying to find a way to say, look, we don't have to have it this way. We can make things better. We need to offer assistance to our friends on the ground.
Definitely. And, the message that I'm reading here in these lessons, it parallels exactly what we've heard from, what what's the most common term? Aliens, ET, extraterrestrial. I mean, they're all
Yeah.
interchangeable these days, it seems. But you know how they've documented how the occurrence of sightings they believe may have spiked once we detonated the first nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And the
Oh,
general
totally, yeah.
belief
Yeah.
and messages that as a result of that, we prompted them to take action and assist in a not indirect, usually indirect way. One thing I forgot to mention is that prior to Project St. Peter, I suspect before the beginning of it, there appears to exist a recording of the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt's voice on VCR tape, which prompted, I imagine, my suspicion is that was likely one of the things that helped secure or bolster the medium's credibility in Mr. Meek's eyes. I'm not sure. And whether that tape still exists or not, I don't know, but it's referenced in here. And one thing that Eleanor Roosevelt said in the same Lab 1, Part 1 that we're discussing today,
Yeah.
quote, feel the peace, paradise, and know in your souls that there shall be no war upon the earth. Be part of that action. Allay the fear of man. Do not generate, please, more fear, concern, and alarm. Be participant and active in this holy work. End quote. And I know there's a lot of references, having, like I said, grown up in religion as a youngster, I'm familiar with all the terminology, and I do realize that now it certainly seems a little outdated. There are a lot of references to holy. There's a lot of reverence that is applied when they speak about the principles, the fundamentals, and people. It's just the level, degree, the pedigree of which these things are brought forward will become obvious once somebody reads it.
Well, I'm noting here too. I'm looking at just going through this, and JFK says that the one requirement for evolved spirit communicators to work with man is, and I say this in quotes, acknowledgement of a vital life source, a living light that sets into motion the cyclic. I said that right, didn't I? Cyclic clock of man's daily life as lived on Earth. And again, it's that reverence you're talking about. This
yeah, I mean, right. Source. Couldn't they just say one requirement is you got to believe in life, man?
Yeah.
No, it's they describe it in a poetic way. It's not just, like I said, it's not just a technical way. It's not just informal way. It's very formal. Well, acknowledgement of a vital life source, a living light that sets into motion the cyclic clock of man's daily life as lived on Earth.
It's very poetic. It's beautiful sounding. Actually, it's nice to read. But what is peace? I mean, that's a really big question to ask. But what really is peace? I think peace means a lot to different people.
Sure. Right? It appears that in this context, it's a general statement, and it appears that nuclear war was one of the primary concerns because it's very expounded upon in depth. And this was 1986. I don't think nuclear war was still the end of the Cold War, right?
Yeah, it was still the end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
I think there's anything with the word nuclear attached to it always gives people goosebumps. But yeah, in this case, though, nuclear war, and that's on the notes here too. JFK says that self-destruction of the human race will not be accepted, including nuclear war.
Right, and that's talk about a firm statement. I mean, that's not in quotes, but when I read it, he said something to the effect of "We will not accept." Like it wasn't like you guys. It was like, hey, little kids, you're not stop slapping each other. You're not going to kill each other.
Yeah.
We're not going to let you.
But that makes me think about this, like people, us, these fleshy bags of water that walk around this very heavy existence we have, bound by gravity. Now, we're having someone say to us, listen, like you just said, stop slapping each other. You're not going to kill each other. What the hell makes us so important that this will not be accepted, as JFK said? That's what makes me, and it's not a question for you, Keith. It's just a question in general. Like, that makes me think, like, why are us, the fleshlings down here, so important? What is our role in this entire machine, this structure of existence, I guess we have?
Yeah, I see.
That makes
a
me
good
think
question.
very hard. Like, you guys are not going to kill yourselves. You need to be here, okay? Yeah,
right, and I've heard a lot of other stuff that was channeled by people in spirit, and that's a general term, people in spirit. I'm just going to use that to refer to anybody that isn't here in a body now that we know of.
Yeah,
it makes it easier. But generally, it appears to be things that we do here in this physical vibration does not just affect our vibration. So apparently, just like we can hear and record EVPs that are initiated in their vibration, passing through, at least to some degree somewhere, into our vibration, the same thing can occur with nuclear bombs. And I don't know, I'm not going to say it's all physical effect too. I think some of it's physical, some of it's vibrational. I've heard all kinds of things separate from Project St. Peter to the effect of, places in the spirit world could cease to exist because it's our imagination or energy which helps support part of their environment, just like part of theirs supports ours. So it's kind of like you can't blow up Hawaii because that tidal wave is going to hurt somebody in Japan, it seems.
Well, and you just hit the nail on the head, though, of kind of what I was thinking, too, was there is a relation between, let's just call it the spirit world, and the physical world. Or what could be heaven, what could be paradise. There may be a relation here. And I'm not saying they depend on us, but yeah, our bullshit, stupid actions we pull down here sometimes as people that I have a real problem with personally, they could have a bigger effect. I think that's one of the biggest downfalls of humankind is just that, is I think some of the biggest issues we've had has come from this idea of lack of perspective and lack of the idea that, yeah, you know what? I'm not the center of the universe. I don't control everything. And if I do this stupid thing that I'm doing right now, it's going to have an effect on a lot of other people around me in a very negative way. We've seen this over and over and over again. So this idea, to me at least, may have a universal effect, that what we may be doing here, even little things we do, have cast this whatever negative juju out to the universe. I don't know. Right?
Sure. Well, I mean, if you look at historically, if we believe any of the theories about our past existence, it seems like we've been here before, over and over and over and over and over and over, and perhaps each time is our next chance to not screw it up. I mean, with Atlantis and all these different things, all these civilizations we don't even know about. Now we're like, okay, the Earth's way older than we thought, and it just keeps getting older.
Yeah.
So you got to wonder, what happened last time? Is it going to happen again?
Yeah.
It does seem to be like like one of those books where you choose your own ending.
Choose your own
back
adventure.
In the day.
We got a pile of them up in the upper part of this house.
I pulled them out of the garbage somewhere.
Garbage picker.
They're in good shape.
Right. And each time you start it, and sometimes you'll make a different choice, thinking that you know where it's going to take you.
Yeah.
But eventually, at the end, you just reach a page that says the end. And they were fascinating because in those stories, there'd be some times when you would find something familiar, like, I already know this page. I've been here before, like deja vu. But then it's just kind of how I see it. It's almost like my perspective it is, like we're just living over and over again, thinking that there's time, and there really isn't.
Well, and what you said is a very profound idea, though, to me. You come to a page and it looks familiar to you. Yeah, it is deja vu. It is that idea of that. And I guess that's where existence as a person in spirit or a person in body, I guess, that's where it comes into play. Like, I've been here before. I got to do the right thing. I got to do the right thing.
I was thinking
going back to,
I was thinking earlier, back to our original when we first started the show, about why these names, like these blatantly famous names, like And then I couldn't help but think of like the reincarnation of consciousness. These certain people that are so charismatic, they're so smart, they seem divinely inspired by something. They stand out among other people.
Yeah.
And maybe they're a type of consciousness that maybe it's not really JFK she's talking to, but it's it's that consciousness that embodied
Symbols.
that embodied JFK's human form on the planet. Form dies, that consciousness goes back up, and then she's able to interpret that consciousness as JFK at that time, because that's the best way someone like her can identify with it at the time that she's speaking. Because, I don't know. I just think of stuff like that.
Or maybe that essence, that essence is just wise. Maybe.
Well, it's an evolved consciousness that keeps going on.
And maybe that is, why we have people that are more famous than other
like
people.
Tesla, or like just
or
people
more
that
evolved people.
seem a little bit more.
Well, I mean, people who invent things, people we hear about this, like they just have a different take on life. Like we hear about eccentrics. Like, I know a handful of eccentrics professionally, and there's some weird cats. There's some weird people, but they're brilliant. Oh my God, are they brilliant?
Well, and a lot of them will say that they receive the information like through a sudden vision, a dream. It just comes to them suddenly. It's just boom. It's not like, hey, I studied for a real long time and then I came up with this idea, which people do.
Yeah.
But the ones that seem to make the biggest difference have those similar characteristics.
Tesla, Edison, Lincoln, they all did that.
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay, yeah. This is sorry. We kind of really went. We were way in the weeds for that one.
Oh, that's all right. Well, we spiral all over the place. So now I have to mention it because you keep bringing it up. Okay, the whole idea of our past selves communicating with our future selves, and our future selves communicating with our past. All right, this is not Project St. Peter, but I need to diverge for a second.
Sure.
This is a different topic, Ouija boards. There are libraries of information out there that are not very well known that are channeled transcripts from a Ouija board. It was a Ouija board connected to a typewriter, right? And this is back in the 80s. There was a Ouija board connected to a typewriter, and a set of two sisters would sit together and they would transcribe things. Now, this information is not necessarily public. One of those sisters is still alive, still working very hard, and she's 100.
Wow.
I've lost contact with her, but it's the content of what they channeled that's of importance. Not just in her work, but in other work, there are indications that after a period of time, they were channeling this person from, I believe, the 1700s in America after it was first discovered. Whatever it was back in the day.
Yeah.
The language is so hard to understand. It's rough. It's not like what you see in the movies. And they came to discover over a period of time that the people they were communicating with were themselves.
Oh, cool.
Another reiteration of themselves in a different timeline. And so that brings up interesting things. Not just one book, not just two, a whole set, a whole library. And there are other cases out there, but I'm not allowed to promote it because I was kind of told by her not to. So I'm just waiting until the time is right to make sure the people are aware that it exists.
That's a trip, though.
Mm-hmm.
Falling back on yourself like that.
Yeah, because we always think it's we've seen things out there, somebody from the future, but we don't often think ourselves from the future, right? Because we're expecting to see our face or us.
But your essence, though, like we said, I mean,
if there is no time, all of your lives are all occurring now anyway. So.
Oh God, this hurts. This is making my brain stop. Oh my God, I want my mommy. I want to go to bed. Oh my God, I'm dying.
That's the needs.
No, it's heavy. It's heavy. No, it's these ideas of this type. I don't know. JFK refers. I'm just going to read. I know. Well, you mentioned Mrs. Roosevelt, which there's a handful of things here. One thing I did. She pointed out too, when she was channeled by Petra, was she indicates this effort they're doing is to be a United Nations effort. Clearly that states look guys, everybody needs to kind of put aside all the BS, and this is going to be something we all work towards. I think that's how I took it. The UN has its own thing, I know, but to me that I do think this is something like, okay, this is going to be a global effort. I guess. I don't know.
Definitely. And her description, her words seem to be much firmer actually than some of the other people's. It's interesting that there's a change in the way the words feel. I'm like, wow, she's really, go get 'em type person. It wasn't just, hey guys, here we are. We're here when you need us.
Well, yeah, it's much
like,
more.
Get off your butt.
Yeah.
Join hands. Get together. Do something about it. And we're here to help you. I mean, it was very direct.
Very direct. I was going to say her stuff was way more direct. Working laboratory will be near capital city.
It was actually Franklin. George Meek actually had, and this is on World ITC,
Okay.
a vision of creating this sort of like sub community, like Lilydale or other places like that. Casadega, Florida.
Yeah.
He actually hoped to have this whole community that was built around the places that house the museum and house the technical apparatus that would be used to communicate all these messages. I mean, it's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, very cool.
Imagine like a theme park.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a good time. We've gone all over the place. We touched on everything from past and future, time travel, crystals, presents. I mean,
Yeah, that was pretty much the tail end of Lab 1. It's kind of where we're getting. I mean, there's a couple more comments.
And how many labs are there total?
How many labs are there total, Keith?
I am aware of there existing at least 14 labs, plus all the supplementary material and videotapes and audio cassettes and all the communications in between and all the drawings and the physical devices themselves.
I do want to note some. There was a 20-minute break in the notes here after Mrs. Roosevelt made her comments, right? And they come back and JFK refers to Angel 1, which I think we may have mentioned. We mentioned Angel 1 earlier, as an electronic advanced space age technology of communicating long distances, converting those distances to light years, a radio achievement, a broadcasting system as yet unknown to man. Which again, we're pointing out wording, and that's a mouthful right there.
I think that's one of the cooler things listed because it just I don't
it's
know
cool
that
as hell.
it's like
It's way cool.
Angel 1.
Corridor of knowledge mentioned. JFK indicates the. I'm gonna slaughter this.
Presidio Council.
Thank you. I was gonna say Presidio has a hand in maintaining and harmonizing the energies needed for the equipment to function properly. So the Presidio Council that's people of spirit. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's one of the governing bodies that answers to another governing body above it. So it's like if you've got the president and then you've got the Secretary of Defense, and it just goes on down the chain. This is I don't know how many levels down, but it's a couple up.
We'll stop. We'll end with this one. I mean, another thing that JFK pointed out was he references Orion, which I assume that's the constellation, something in that constellation, and says to dismiss our preconceptions and stereotypes of other life forms, and says this is not a red alert. I guess the idea.
I would like to go ahead and read those two paragraphs if I may. I think it might be a good close.
I'd love to hear that. Thank you.
We're just going to do a quick touch on President John F. Kennedy's telepathically channeled message through a medium in 1986. Quote, "We are not void of humor and wit. However, the solemnity of this occasion by necessity shall be in need of a more sounder spiritual tone. As the purpose of this work and the celestial broadcasting system under the code name Project St. Peter is a two-way beneficent blessing, allowing man a direct part and active participation in communicating with not only our membership, but also beings from advanced civilizations." End quote. He goes on to say, quote, "Therefore, kindly dismiss your preconceptions of the purported spiritual and mental characteristics of a soul highly evolved, now residing, for example, in the evolved civilizations of Orion. The more often you are able to put aside your intellectual endeavors and logical analyzation, as well as a calming of your emotional responses, obviously necessary to encourage your interest and maintain your focus, are quite unnecessary with regards to any Paradise to Earth alarm. This is a gift, my fellow Americans. This is not a red alert. I, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, am able to make the point no clearer than that." End quote. And so that's pretty fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Later on in the labs, they actually reference this. I said it gets even crazier, more crazy. That a signal would be sent out of this device into the ethers. It would be picked up by other civilizations. That would be aliens, extraterrestrials, or people in other geographically physical places other than Earth would pick it up and they would relay it to heaven. And I'm not even joking about that. It's in here.
What?
It's cool.
Yes. I'm serious.
I want
I'm
one of
serious.
these.
They indicate that this type of communication is difficult, but it's also with the assistance of advanced civilizations, which is what they're calling aliens, ETs, in other places.
So they're using them as routers.
Yes, exactly.
They're using them as router. They're using them as celestial routers, basically.
Right, like satellites.
Yeah, same idea.
And they give indications later on that certain things need to be done at certain times of day on certain days of the year, which we'll get into later on, which some people will find interesting, when it comes to, all that kind of knowledge that I'm not educated in.
Yeah. So what we're going to do with this was first in many shows I think we're going to do on this. We don't really have a schedule just yet, I think. We kind of talked about it briefly before the show. But what we're going to do is and that's kind of what your idea was too, Keith, was we're going to take time and just walk through this stuff like we're doing right now, which I think is some of the best times I've had on this show, honestly, was tonight, going through this and, being able to have the space, at least for all of us, to kind of expand on these ideas too.
Well, I like also the idea of looking at something that people aren't aware of.
Well, yeah,
it's not
what
just
the heck
the
is
usual
this thing?
stuff
Yeah.
out there. That's something new and different.
Yeah.
And I like that.
So, go
Right,
ahead.
and the funny thing is, it's been sitting out there for about 10 months.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody even knows it exists, and that's fine. However, okay, so what's on the internet? Let me get to that. Our website. I know I'm no longer a fan of doing website work, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But Lab 1 Part 1, which is the first half of the first blue binder from 1986, is available at idigitalmedium.com. Click on articles. Click on where it says articles in the top, and you'll see it's the 6th most recent article. As we go, we're going to basically I take them to work, I scan them. That process is actually fast. Then I convert them to PDF, searchable PDF. And then I actually copy them into Word. And then we have other people that have helped us edit major mistakes from there. And then we convert it back into PDF. And then we put it on the website for you guys. So as we go, we're going to make that PDF grow where people can go and just type in, okay, Orion, and hit the search button. And then it'll instantly show you everywhere that is referenced. I'm also starting to compile sort of a Keith's notes / glossary / definition / terms, because it's that expansive.
It is. Well,
and that's not available yet, but we'll just continue with that.
And what we're going to do, we'll make sure what we do here with the show is we'll, of course, I'm looking at the link right now to Lab 1 Part 1, right? And we'll make that part of the posting for the show too. So, people have something they can go right straight to that link and download what you have out there. That'd
be great.
And
part of that is I'm a big fan of efficiency these days. So if I don't think people are interested, I don't really have as much of an impulse, to do things in a nice way. But if people are interested, and if you want to help, there's always room for helping hands also.
Yeah.
And there is also the opportunity for preservation. So if you're sitting on a pile of money and you say, hey, that meta-science stuff sounds cool, we need to go get it, and reach out.
No, and that's a cool thing. I mean, people should keep that in mind. There's a lot of people that are into ITC, and that's something to think about too with this, or even to
What
just lend a helping
state,
hand.
if you can say, Keith, what state is this in?
It's in Florida.
Oh,
That's where Keith's at. Yeah.
No, I know where Keith's at, but like the other,
Oh,
where the stuff's at.
It's in Florida.
Oh, it is in Florida too.
It is.
Oh, okay.
Funny coincidence. Huh?
Okay. Huh. There are no coincidences.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to that kind of stuff, we want to preserve things. However, I'm not in a position to be storing stuff. And I got to stress the factor that this stuff is what I call endangered. So there's still cassettes that haven't been converted. We don't even know what there is. There's not even a table of contents or a listing of what these items are. They're not worth monetary value to anybody and should not be. Our intent is to, if we ever are successful in obtaining them, well, first of all, we're going to get all the digital stuff out in the public where it can benefit the public the most. And for the physical stuff, we're hoping in the future to have a type of museum or something. But
yeah,
we don't want people out treasure hunting, thinking that they're going to plug and play. It's just not going to happen. So
Yeah,
I need to make that clear.
So this was Lab 1, Part 1, basically. Or it was this. We call this Lab 1. Am I correct? I'm trying to still formulate this. What we discussed
Correct.
tonight is like Lab 1.
Correct. It was the easiest. What happens? I sat down and I started going through it. Halfway through, I was like, "Oh my god, I just have to end it now."
So what we'll do, and this is something we're going to discuss, after, via email or something, I'm sure, when we're going to do Part 2 or Lab 2, right? So that'll, and what I think I've been kind of formulating this because we kind of have. And this is all because I think you're kind of working on this as we go along, right, Keith?
Seat of the pants, right?
Yeah.
Well,
so
correct.
really, what it comes down to then is, once you think you're at a spot where you're ready to do like another show, then we just do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's
And
pretty.
I've seen it work
yeah.
better under deadlines, as you see. But
No. I mean, but really, I mean, it's I at your pace. I mean, because this is something I think is whatever the truth is in this. I think it's important to discuss it. I think this makes, like you said, or like we just kind of discussed throughout the show, for educational purposes like this. I keep saying this about a lot of stuff we talk about nowadays. You learn a lot about life, about things. I like to draw parallels about where I'm at in my, my development, I guess, or anybody too. So you learn from things like this, I think, too. That's
Right,
why. That's why it's important.
Yeah, and then you look at it. Look at how many people have benefited from the Seth material, or I believe it's Jane Roberts.
Yeah.
How many people has that touched or affected?
Yeah.
A Course in Miracles, things like that. What if this is another one of those things that's just been sitting, waiting for the right time?
Yeah, totally. So that was Lab 1. Thank you, Keith. Obviously, we're going to be doing another one of these hopefully soon. And it's going to be just something we're doing with the show here. And Keith, thanks for letting us do this here. I think this is really cool.
It's exclusive. Exclusive to you guys.
Well,
so thank you for having
and
me.
we're really honored to have that because these are some fascinating ideas. So, all right. Till next time, Keith. We're going to be doing this soon, hopefully, and it'll be Lab 2, correct?
Lab 1, Part 2.
Lab 1. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Or whatever we come up with. If we have 50 lab parts 1 and 2,
Right.
then I'm going to have to go, Keith, you got to conjugate it. Get it all back
All
together.
right, so Lab 1, Part 2. All right, cool. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll see.
Ghostly Talk!
Version 3.0.
Dead air never sounded so good.